everybody. Welcome to the show. This is your host, Hunter McWaters. It's great to be with you. Today, I'm joined by Mr. James Nash from the Six Ranch podcast and Actual Ranch. How's it going, man?
Really good. How are you?
Good, man. Been looking forward to talking to you for a while. We had something set up a while ago, and then I think you had to be a good Samaritan or something. What happened?
Just somebody had slid off the road. It was real icy and
Okay.
their rig was down in some water and they needed some help. So in the process of working on that, I showed up about I don't know, 45 minutes late and I'm really sorry about that.
No,
I
man.
really I tried to be a really punctual person. So it's hard on me when I show up late, even if it's like less than a minute late for stuff.
Me too. I'd almost rather like not show up at all than show up late. Like I hate being late, but no, I'm glad you helped that person. That's definitely like more important. And I think everything happens for a reason. So we got a chance to meet really briefly in Salt Lake, and but yeah, it's good to have you on the show, man. Thanks for giving me some time.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, man. Um, so I prepared quite a bit last time just by listening to a lot of your stuff. And I was really excited about talking to you because you have done a lot of very interesting, wild things in your life. Like it seems like you've lived like multiple different lives almost. So but real quick, so you're based in Oregon, correct?
That's right. I'm in Northeast Oregon. The Six Ranch is an old family ranch, and it's between the Eagle Cap Wilderness and Hell's Canyon. And we're kind of in a river slash prairie area that are between those two really significant terrain features. And yeah, my family's been here for a long time. We settled here in 1884, and it's been continuously family run since then, which uh, which makes it one of the oldest businesses in Oregon.
Oh wow, that's awesome. How large is the ranch?
It's not that big. Sometimes it feels super small to me. And actually, my mom and I were just talking about this the other day because she lives on one edge of it and I live on the other edge. And I was doing some burning and I had a fire kind of get away from me for a second, got really sporty and but got it caught. And anyway, she came out to look and see how much of an idiot I am. And we were talking about how big it feels at times. So like you could certainly walk across it in a day. You'd just be tired afterwards.
Okay. So that's still pretty big. I mean, it would take you an entire day to walk across it.
Well, I mean, it's all relative, right? There's a lot bigger ranches around,
Sure.
um, but it's about the size that like we can do it as a family, but there's always something that we can't get to, right?
Yeah.
So you can't do all of it, but you can do it just as a family, and that's what we do.
Cool. And so it's a working cattle ranch, correct?
Yeah, we have cattle, we have horses, we have sheep, we have chickens, we have produce, we've got a farm stand where we sell all this stuff. We've got honey. It's relatively diverse and it's all natural and it's just grass and wildlife. And
That's cool.
we really treat our cattle like wildlife and we have for a long time. So rather than uh, doing a typical thing where you're calving in late winter, early spring, we were calving at the same time that the elk were,
Oh,
and just
cool.
kind of following those natural models to make sure that we were doing what we could to align with the rhythms and patterns of nature rather than align with maybe what the market says you should do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's probably good to work with nature, not against it, right?
Yeah, it's much more comfortable to calve in May and June than it is in February and March.
Yeah, I bet. Um, and so I'm assuming, so do you guys have a pretty healthy population of like deer and elk on the ranch?
We have one elk on the ranch right now. Her name is Dee. She got something bad happened to her last fall. I picked her up in October was the first time I found her. And there's a large herd of elk that's just a couple miles away for a good portion of the year. And I think that's where she came from. She's got an ear that's all jacked up and she's a younger animal. And I kind of think that the wolves I think that the wolves got into her a little bit, or she got in a fight with a lion, maybe,
Hmm.
and uh, and she just didn't feel comfortable where that herd was living, and she came down and has spent the entire winter on the Six Ranch. I got a picture of her a couple days ago, and she was on a hillside with white-tailed deer on one side and mule deer on the other
Oh,
side.
that's cool.
And then there's this 2-year-old cow elk standing in the middle of everything, looking goofy. So I hope she has a calf and stays for a while. I don't really
Maybe she
want
identifies as a deer.
maybe. I don't want to have a herd of elk on the ranch. They're awful on fences, and
I bet.
their feed bill is pretty high as well. But I do a lot for mule deer, especially, and trying to improve habitat here on the ranch for them.
Cool, man. Yeah, I hunted Oregon this year for the first time ever and had a great time. We were in like southwest Oregon,
Okay.
but really beautiful state, man. Like one of the most beautiful places I've ever hunted. You're in Eastern Oregon, I'm assuming, but awesome, awesome place.
It's incredibly diverse. We've got volcanoes, we've got huge mountain ranges, we have the Oregon coast, obviously. We have this massive desert in southern Oregon. It's part of the Great Basin. And then we've got these really pristine alpine wildernesses.
Hmm.
The one being close to me is super interesting from a geological standpoint because it looks and acts like the Rockies, and it has all of the animals that are in the Rockies, but the mountain range itself is an island. It's called a batholith.
Hmm.
So when we had, many millions of years ago, when we had all these big lava flows that were covering the inland Northwest, it put down so much pressure on the crust of the earth that this mountain range popped out of it like a tooth.
Hmm.
Uh, so we have this granite and limestone and old seafloor that is popped out of this area, and all around it is a sea of sagebrush, except on my side is this wonderful grassland prairie that drops into the deepest and steepest canyon in North America. And it's just a really radical and interesting place that, creates its own weather and has its own, identity as far as the wildlife goes. But yeah, it looks and acts like the Rockies without being part of a range. So we're very much on an island here.
That's interesting, man. Yeah, I remember like it was just we were everything from looked like almost like rainforest to there was some sagebrush type areas. There was the kind of rolling yellow grass hills with the live oaks, um, which is beautiful. Just really cool, diverse, and really enjoyed looking for blacktails. Very, very cool deer. But you guys have mainly mule deer on your side, I guess, over there.
Mule deer and whitetail both. The muleys are not doing well. Mule deer have been in decline throughout all of their habitat since about 1959. As far as I can tell, that's the peak of our nation's mule deer population.
Hmm.
And they've been in decline throughout their range, although there's areas where they're doing better than others, but generally they're going downhill. In Oregon, we saw a really rapid decline occur after 1993 when it became illegal to hunt mountain lions with dogs. So our mountain lion population skyrocketed and the mule deer population crashed. Then as wolves showed up, starting in the 2009, 2010 time frame, that put even more pressure on those deer. So then we started seeing really, really massive reductions where, we might have half as many deer as we did just 4 years ago. So the muleys really not doing well. The whitetails are doing okay, although they're a little bit more vulnerable to some of those hemorrhagic diseases that
Hmm.
pop up during some of these warmer summers that we've had.
Yeah, and that's maybe a whole different topic, but you know, I see the anti-hunters pushing for getting rid of predator hunting. And not only is that like an erosion of rights and also introducing predators, but also, and perhaps more scary to me, is they probably know that with more predators, these populations decline. And then the argument of, well, we need hunters to manage deer populations and elk populations, could be not the case anymore if the predators are allowed to just run amok, which is pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, I think that those folks come from a good place in their heart, right? That they don't want to see a cougar get killed or a wolf get killed, because they have an emotional connection with that animal. And regardless of the maybe falsity of how that emotional relationship is created, um, it doesn't matter because that's how they feel. The problem is that reality acts a little bit differently. And I think California is a really interesting case study there. So when mountain lion hunting was banned in California, there were more mountain lions that were killed in the following years than in the previous years by hunters. So it didn't make it so that mountain lions weren't getting killed anymore. What changed was now mountain lions are getting killed by government employees. So rather than
Yeah.
making money, which is used to conduct all these conservation projects, now it's costing taxpayer dollars and pulling away from a smaller pool of funds as it is. So yeah, hunters are definitely valuable for managing wildlife populations. They're very valuable because we're the only source of funding for uh, for these wildlife agencies.
Mm-hmm.
There is a caveat to that, and it's something that isn't brought up nearly enough, in my opinion. The the funding that goes to states from the federal government comes out of a fund called Pittman Robertson, and
Mm-hmm.
PNR for short. So the PNR funds get sent back to the states, and it is matched with a number of hunting and fishing licenses that that state sells. So the more licenses that that state sells, then the bigger portion of that federal wad of money they get. Now, what actually funds PNR is a federal excise tax that's 11%, and it's on all guns and all ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few other things that fall into that, and there's a fishing category as well. It's a Dingell-Johnson Act, but uh, all kind of the same stuff. The point that I'm getting at is that target shooters and people that don't necessarily have a connection to hunting are actually the ones that are paying for conservation more than anybody else, and they're doing it through that federal excise tax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I for a number of years worked for Willis Robertson's son and grandson,
Oh, cool.
which is the guy from the Robertson
Yeah,
Pittman Act. But anyway, have you ever seen a Bigfoot out there?
I've not, and I've asked around quite a bit. I haven't run into a really credible Bigfoot story because I'd love to talk to somebody about that.
Mm-hmm.
I was really scared of Bigfoot as a kid, like really scared of Bigfoot as a kid. I was afraid to be out at night. Every sound that I heard in the woods, I thought was Bigfoot and he was coming to get me. And then as trail cameras got more popular, I thought, you know what, we would have hooked him up by now if Bigfoot was real. So if Bigfoot is real, then then they are scary good at avoiding trail cameras.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna kind of go with not at this stage.
Yeah. I don't want to get too deep into this topic, but I have a close personal friend who's also a combat veteran, very trustworthy dude who has had an encounter with one.
Nice.
And I don't want to go into it, but stay tuned because I'm working on him to come on the podcast. He's also in Oregon, but
Well,
anyway,
let's talk about this a little bit more because
okay,
it's a really interesting thing.
sure.
Cultures all over the world have a Bigfoot myth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even cultures that are disconnected, like they wouldn't have been able to talk to each other
Right.
and spread this myth. I do think that it's possible for somebody to see Bigfoot and have a Bigfoot experience without there being a Bigfoot there, and
Sure.
they can still honestly and genuinely believe and feel that. My best guess is that it's part of human psychology to have this sort of lucid image in this interaction. And I do think that it's just a psychological glitch, and that it's part of being a human is to see these things even if they're not real, right?
Hmm.
And that doesn't take credibility away from anybody who's had that kind of experience, because they believe it. That's how they interacted with it. They're not being dishonest. And that can be true at the same time as there wasn't a physical being there that you were actually interacting with. But
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing your buddy's story. You'll have
Yeah.
to shoot me a message when
It's
he talks about that.
it's wild because it includes other people, it includes government agencies, and this guy has no reason to lie, and he doesn't want to tell the story. Like I'm pulling it out of him, so it's not like he's like trying to get notoriety or something. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there's probably more to it than just it's a like primate species that we haven't discovered yet. I think if that was the case, we would have trail cam photos, we would have bodies, et cetera, et cetera. There's got to be something, I don't know what, but something metaphysical to it, or could be something, some kind of genetic, black budget genetic projects. Who knows? Um, yeah. And then have you heard of wolf? Have you heard of like dogmen, like werewolves?
Yeah, I mean, in popular culture, of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's like almost as many sightings of those as Bigfoots and more recently. And anyway, I don't want to get too weird, but I've heard, well, some people believe that those could actually, and this could be a Bigfoot too, could actually be humans that intentionally have formed relationships with demonic spirits and actually can shapeshift into these creatures.
Hmm. Well, I mean, there's more on heaven and earth than is written in your books, you know.
That's true.
Uh, did have you ever read the original Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula?
I have not,
Uh,
but I know vampires are real too.
my degree is in literature and writing, and I think about books a lot, and I really like to think about these themes that persist through time.
Mm-hmm.
And Dracula is a fantastic one because, I mean, think of how many spin-offs of this story there have been,
Mm-hmm.
and werewolves are part of that story. And you can take so much about what occurs in popular culture and like stimulus for fear today that can be written about or can be talked about or can be used in a film, and so much of it comes back from this one story that had some roots in local mythology for sure, but it's very good, and it's a fantastic audiobook as well. If you get the audiobook, it's done with a cast, so you've
Oh,
got
cool.
lots of different voices, and it's just excellent. So even if you're not into that kind of thing that much, and you've got a 12-hour road trip, you might throw that one on because it's pretty
For
darn
sure.
good.
Yeah, I love audiobooks, man. Um, okay, so before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, um, like I said, you've done a ton of different cool things in your life. You're a combat veteran. I believe you were a like backcountry firefighter at one point. Is that correct?
Yeah, and
Um,
that was a terrific job too that we can talk about. But I was a helicopter repeller, and I
okay.
did that for 5 years through college.
Okay.
Uh, and
Eh,
the
Go ahead.
farther I get away from it, the more interesting that job becomes to me.
Yeah. And then I think you've done some guiding. I'm sure I've missed stuff. But anyway, I want to hear your story, man. Like, take me like just in chronological order, and I'll stop you and probably ask questions along the way. But your life just seems very fascinating to me, so I want to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I grew up here on the ranch, old family ranch like we talked about, and grew up r real poor. You know, we were land rich and cash poor, but I didn't really notice. I was very wealthy in my opportunity for experiences, and I started working at a young age. I was working full time in the summers by the time I was 8, and continued on with that.
Doing what?
At that time, I was trapping. I was trapping gophers, um, and I trapped
That's awesome.
15 gallons of gopher tails over the course of a couple years for a neighboring farmer, and he promised to pay me every year and hadn't, and eventually gave me a 1967 Ford F100
That's
pickup.
awesome. Dude, that
Um,
just reminded me, my first paid gig ever was a neighbor paid me to come to their house and shoot muskrats with my bow.
yeah,
I wasn't
that's a
that
good job.
successful as you, but yeah.
That's a good job. And trapping is a great job for a kid. You can learn a lot about business, and you know that you've got to catch these animals to make this money, and then you can spend part of that on more traps, and you can figure out how to scale businesses.
Mm.
Uh, I think it was really important for me to learn those skills, and really I had accidentally created a business as a young person and learned some of those fundamentals there. I started guiding backcountry wilderness trips, horseback, and packing mules and stuff like that when I was 14.
Wow.
And those trips were anywhere between 1 hour and 10 days long. And yeah, by the time I was 15, I was taking groups in by myself that were 10 days long. And I was guiding fishing and taking people all over the wilderness. And
But you said when you were
uh,
15, you're taking people in by yourself for 10
yeah,
days?
yeah.
That's good. That's legit.
Um, it was great. It was awesome. It was a
Trying to think
really
what I
cool
was doing at
cool job.
15. Not that.
Not that. Yeah. I started fighting fire when I was 16, on a contract crew. I graduated high school when I was 17. I'd spent a year in Norway uh, when I was in high school, and I wrestled while I was there and learned
What brought
Norwegian.
you to Norway?
I just had this opportunity to go and try out for their national wrestling team,
Mm.
because I'd met their coach at a state wrestling tournament here when I was a sophomore in high school. And yeah, I thought it would be similar to Alaska. I thought it would be just a cool experience. So I went and did that and had a great time. It was really challenging. I learned a lot about myself and really developed as a person because I had to be so independent there. Learning Norwegian is a hard thing to do, but if you're immersed in it, it happens pretty fast. So I was pretty close to fluent after about 5 or 6 months, and after about 9, 10 months, I didn't have that much of an accent anymore.
Wow.
But learning something like math in Norwegian when you don't really know either of those languages, or learning
Yeah.
Spanish in Norwegian, those were really hard things to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever tried to learn a third language and a second language or vice versa, but it's a
No.
trick.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's wild, man. And I was a wrestler too, which is
yeah,
very tough sport, very like mentally challenging and yeah.
it's great. I think it's one of the only high school sports that's worth putting on a resume. I would hire somebody because they were a wrestler. I wouldn't care if they'd done just about any other high
Yeah.
school
I
sport.
mean, being a high school kid, putting on a singlet in front of a crowd of people and going mano a mano with another dude, like I remember to this day, probably some of the highest stress levels of my life were before wrestling matches. I mean, and maybe that says something about me, but I mean, man, I would just be like so like the butterflies and just the sweat, like just so like so much cortisol, like just going crazy. Like it was just so intense, man. Plus, I was like on my school only had a varsity team, and so I was like a sixth grader wrestling in 103. I probably weighed like 87 pounds, and I was going against those like, those like freakish seniors in high school who have like mustaches but still somehow only weigh 103 pounds
Yeah.
and just like destroying me.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
just wild.
really good for you though to learn how to experience defeat where it's all on you. Like
Yes.
if you lose in a wrestling match, that is all on you. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And you're going to lose. You're going to lose matches. You're going to win matches too. And you have to figure out how to be gracious in that victory and understand, the compassion that you need for the person that you were just up against because you know
Hmm.
how they're feeling too. it's also an interesting blend of individual action and responsibility as well as working on a team. And I think that's what lends itself so well to the job market later on, because as an employee, I really expect somebody to be able to do things on their own, but also be able to function in a team.
Hmm.
And things like wrestling, cross country, they really create that type of person.
Yeah. So anyway,
Uh,
continue.
so anyways, yeah, had a wonderful experience in Norway. Came home, fought fire again, graduated high school, and then I went to college at the University of Montana Western in Dillon, Montana, the trout fishing capital of the universe. And I studied literature and writing, creative writing, fly fishing and fly tying there. After I graduated, I went into the Marine Corps and went to officer candidate school. I commissioned, went to the basic school and competed for my job there and was selected as a tank officer. I ended up spending 5 years in the Marines and deployed to Afghanistan. I was wounded twice there. I was awarded two Purple Hearts, along with some other stuff. And yeah, I was medically retired after that deployment. I spent about a year and a half in the hospital system, I guess, and then came home. Went back to guiding. I was guiding fly fishing and whitewater, and then I ended up just creating my own fly fishing business, and then that turned into an outfitting business, and the outfitting business turned into a media company. So now I do all types of media and I guide all kinds of things. And I travel a lot to advocate for wildlife and for hunting and learn about the different ways that people interact with the outdoors.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna back up a little bit and unpack some stuff.
Yeah.
So you studied literature in college. Did you know you wanted to go into the military at that
Yeah.
point? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure the exact timing. Like, was it such that you knew pretty much you were gonna go to war?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the strongest likelihood, right? We're still very much at war, and I was only interested in combat arms. I was only interested in the Marine Corps. I had applied to all the military academies when I was in high school, so that was an option that I considered. I ended up with a rodeo scholarship to go to Montana, and I thought, man, that sounds like a lot more fun. And I was going to wrestle for West Point, and I was so tired of dieting. I dieted so
Yeah.
hard for so long. I just didn't want to deal with that anymore. So I kind of let some selfish thoughts take over and went with what sounded like it was going to be more fun. Fighting fire all the way through college was also really great, and I ended up on this kick-ass helicopter rappel crew called Fraser, and we lived on a really remote outstation that was, at least an hour drive from anywhere else, and there was just like a you know, double wide trailer out there that the fire crew lived in. There's a single wide trailer that was the offices for the managers, and we had a helicopter, and we would go and we would fly to fires all over the Northwest, the Southwest, the Great Basin. We were a national resource, so we went wherever we were needed.
Yeah.
That crew even responded to things like Hurricane Katrina and to uh, the spacecraft that blew up, the Discovery craft. They went
Oh
down to
yeah.
help with that. We did a lot of emergency response because we could get anywhere relatively fast. And rappelling isn't like you see uh, in like Black Hawk Down or something where you're sliding down a big rope that's like 50 feet off the ground. We were attaching a descent device to this rope inside the helicopter, and we're rappelling 250 feet. A lot of times through forest canopy that was so tight that you couldn't see the ground when you got out of the helicopter,
Dang.
and you descend so fast that your gloves and your rope will often be smoking by the time you get to the ground.
Jeez.
So, we're really specializing in relatively small fires in remote wilderness areas, remote sections of forests that didn't have road or trail access. So we're fighting fire without water as well. So you slide down this rope. You're going to be there with at least one other repeller. So sometimes it's just two of you. I've also been on fires that we had like, 28 repellers and, 12 smoke jumpers, and it's all aerial delivered firefighters. But generally, it's relatively small units and small fires because those are the ones that you can actually catch without water. And as soon as you got to the ground, you're gathering up your rope, getting off your rappel harness, getting out of your flight suit, breaking open a firebox that they would send down to you, and you'd grab a shovel and a Pulaski and put on your hard hat
What's a
and
Pulaski?
a Pulaski. Oh gosh, a Pulaski is an axe on one side and a hoe on the other.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a tremendous firefighting tool. So then you're going to go and try and get to the base of the fire, and you'll start digging line, which is basically like digging a trail. You got to dig down to mineral soil because, dirt and rocks don't burn. And then you work the edges of the fire until you can get all the way around it. And then once it's lined, you've got it captured. There's nowhere else that can go. You've got to get inside, cut down the trees that are on fire, take all the woody material that's burning, and I would pile it up and I'd make these big bonfires. So my first night, I would just have these huge raging fires inside of my fire. I would burn up everything in there that could burn, and then over the next days, you're digging it all up, you're feeling everything with your hands. And, we'd have 3 gallons of water and about 36 hours, 48 hours worth of food. But oftentimes you're on that fire for 3 or 4 days. And then you've got to pack out at the end of it to the nearest trailhead
Mm.
or nearest road. And the pack outs were incredibly challenging. The lightest pack I ever carried, I think, was 98 pounds. The
Oh
heaviest
my
one I carried
gosh.
was 154 pounds. And I carried that pack for 10 hours out of the Winaha wilderness. One of the harder things I've ever done in my life physically. So it was just this crazy job. And to think about sending young men and women into these wilderness areas and like, here's an axe, here's a shovel, here's a little bit of water for you to kind of stay hydrated with, here's a little bit of food, here's a radio. Um, Best of luck. Like, hope you can catch it. It is an absolutely phenomenal thing what smoke jumpers and repellers and hot shots are out there doing today. And the conditions are only getting worse for people to fight fire in. And we owe those folks a big debt of gratitude because they are risking everything. They're risking everything every week of the summer just to kind of keep our forests alive.
Wow. That's insane, man.
And I paid for college doing it.
Yeah. Um, so I'm assuming you don't really have like camping gear, right? You just kind of sleep under the stars.
That's one of the, yeah, that's kind of the best and worst of it. So you dig your guts out all day long, and that first shift is almost always 16 hours, if not 24 hours. And at the end of it, you're incredibly tired, right? Imagine working in this steep and hot environment and digging, which is one of the most physically demanding things you can do. And then at the end of it, oftentimes there's no flat ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to dig a grave on the hillside just so you've got a spot that you don't roll away in the middle of the night. And
Jeez.
yeah, sometimes I would try and sleep in a hammock, but that's really cold. A lot of times it's cold on those fires.
Yeah.
But yeah, usually you just dig yourself a little grave on the side of the hillside and crawl into that.
That's got to be one of the toughest jobs on the planet, man. I just blanked out what I was going to ask you. Oh, did you ever have any like close calls or like,
Yeah, for sure. I had some fires blow up and get really big on me. Usually it starts happening around the first week of August. Firefighters call it Dirty August, and you start in July in the Northwest, and those fires are, tenth of an acre, quarter acre. You catch them quick. You watch them the next day. There's no smokes. You hike out. You're good. And then by the end of July, they're really testing you. And like, oh, we barely got that one. That was close. And Dirty August rolls around, and that humidity drops, and the temperature comes up, and you start getting these weird winds that are on the leading edge of the monsoons as they make their way north, and you get weird stuff that starts to happen. That's when you get those big running crown fires and grass fires that are going 30, 40 miles an hour. and that's where you start losing them. And I repelled a fire one time with my friend Corey Otten, and Corey and I, we basically just repelled it so that we could start talking to all the retardant planes that were coming in and doing drops and sort of running that air show aspect of things. And this fire was doubling, every 10 minutes, it felt like. So what started out as a 1 acre fire when we got there was really quickly a 100 acre fire moving towards a 1,000 acre fire. It burned across a uh, a a highway, and it actually melted the asphalt when it went across. Just an incredibly hot and powerful fire. As we were packing out of that, because we sort of had to run for it to get away from it, since we weren't able to use any of that firefighting gear yet, all those packs were just as full as they could be, and it split Corey's sternum. So
Oh,
he wasn't able to carry his pack anymore. And one
the
option would be,
load literally split his sternum.
yeah, he's a
That
tough
is
guy too.
insane.
Um, but we could have left his pack there and it would have gotten burned up and whatever. But I thought, well, we don't have that far to go. So I strapped his pack to my pack and then made it like the next mile or so. But, you know, we never weighed that, but that was probably right in that, 190 to 200 pound mark. But it wasn't that far, like I say, and it was relatively flat. So that was a close call. I had fires blow up on me while I was sleeping, and I would have to get up in the middle of the night and go find someplace else to live because that fire was going to come up the ridge that I was on or whatever. You have trees that fall down around you all the time. That kills a lot of firefighters. Uh, and then just steep ground, you're in some of these impossibly steep places that you would never be otherwise. And there's slips, trips, and falls, and bees and rattlesnakes, and there's all kinds of things that are out there trying to get you. But you're also doing it at a point in your life where you're relatively young and can manage through all that stuff, and you just kind of have the grace of good luck to carry you through.
Yeah, man, that's wild. I think the hardest pack out I ever did probably was like 135 pounds for about 5 miles, and
That's brutal.
it was pretty brutal, but not compared to what you're talking about. But yeah, man, I can't even imagine.
Well, look,
That's
I
insane.
I want to be clear that I'm not advocating for people to do that kind of thing, and I'm certainly not bragging about it because
No, no,
looking back, I should have just let it burn up. Probably both of our packs, just drop them and
yeah,
leave. But I just had so much ego at that time, and a lot of confidence that I hadn't earned yet. So, I was just doing things that I shouldn't have done. I can also say that most repellers have bad knee injuries, they have bad neck injuries, and they feel the penalty of carrying that weight for the rest of their lives. And I think that they shouldn't be doing it too much anymore, but if we could get a helicopter into a meadow that's close by and land and pick those guys up, we should be doing that. However, the Wilderness Act doesn't allow helicopters to land.
hmm.
So that's one of the reasons that rappelling and smoke jumping exist, is because we could just go land, but then you have to get a waiver from all these people, and by that
Wow.
point, the fire's blown up. There were fires, dude, that we had to rappel with crosscut saws because a a we couldn't get permission to use a chainsaw even though we were fighting fire
Oh,
because it's in a wilderness area. So
wow.
you're strapping a freaking misery whip to the outside of a firebox and sliding it down in there, and then you've got to have two guys working on a crosscut to cut down a tree that is 1,000 degrees because it's on fire and you're
Yeah,
standing in hot ash. It's it's pretty dumb, honestly, but
yeah.
that's
The
just
irony
what
there
it
is
is.
just like you're literally fighting to save the wilderness, but you can't use a combustion engine.
Yeah, let's do it by some, 1968 rules or whatever. But
Wow, man.
it is what it is.
Yeah, that reminds me of other stupid things like film permits. Anyway, um, so okay, so you did that, and you're like an intellectual studying literature, and then you go to war.
Yeah.
Take me through that experience. how did you end up in a tank? What was a tank like?
Yeah.
Just everything.
Well, so the commissioning process for me, since I didn't go through ROTC, was a 10-week long course called OCC, Officer Candidate Course. And it had about a 60 something percent attrition rate. So most of the guys that went in there didn't make it. So let's say we start with a little over 600 guys. That's been weeded down from about 10,000 applicants. Then you graduate, just over 200 of them that then commission as officers. So now you're a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. Then you go to the basic school, and I think we've all heard that every Marine is a rifleman. So every Marine in the Marine Corps has gone through enough combat training that they can function inside an infantry platoon. Furthermore, every Marine officer is trained to be an infantry platoon commander. Now, the actual infantry platoon commanders go on to through another follow-on school that is very rigorous, very tough, and they're the ones who are really, truly proficient and professional at those jobs. But whether you are, a lawyer or a fighter pilot or a logistics officer or a supply officer, you are all going to go through this 6-month long course called the basic school. It's in Quantico and it sucks. It is a miserable experience. You're mad all the time, but it's great. And every Marine officer ever has gone through it, and that's just what it is. Now, at that school, you are competing for your job
Mm.
because the only jobs that are designated going in are the lawyers and the pilots. So everybody else is competing academically, physically, and through leadership to see how they're going to get ranked. And there's only 2 spots available for tanks. A lot of guys wanted them, and I just happened to to get one of those jobs, and felt very fortunate to get that because tanks are awesome. I think every little boy at some point learns about tanks and thinks, "Man, that sounds pretty fun," and it is. So being a tank platoon commander meant that I was in charge of 4 tanks. I was
Mm.
in a tank, and you're on the battlefield your entire career as a tank officer. There's never been a Marine Corps general from tanks. So every officer has always been in a tank on the battlefield, and that's something that's pretty unique as well. That when the fighting's done, all the officers are out there too. And yeah, I had a great tank platoon, man. I had really good NCOs, my non-commissioned officers. I had a great staff non-commissioned officer, and uh, we had the highest gunnery score in the Marine Corps. So when we're going out and firing the tanks, which is basically a competition, but it's also a qualification. My platoon shot the best, maneuvered the best in the entire Marine Corps. I'm so proud of those guys. And then we went on to deploy to the Helmand province of Afghanistan. And it was during a time when Obama was really trying to get us out of Afghanistan and was drawing troops down a lot, and those were the numbers that they wanted to see. It was like fewer troops there. What that meant was the Marines that were in Helmand were so few that all they could do was hold on to the bases that we had. They couldn't even go
Mm.
out on patrols and do drug interdiction and things like that. So tanks were the only maneuver element in the whole area of operations besides recon. But in our very first mission, recon got in trouble for roughing up a POW, and they got pulled. So they got benched for their whole deployment. So it was just tanks. So then we ended up pairing with special forces from other countries, primarily Britain and Australia, and then going out on our own and doing jobs that really tanks were not meant to do, but we did it. The Army never sent tanks to Afghanistan. The Danes did, but they never went outside the wire. So the Marine tanks were the only ones, and we had a tough deployment. It was considered the most kinetic tank fighting since World War II.
Wow.
And then just a few years later, the Marine Corps canceled its tank program, got rid of tanks, got rid of snipers. The Marine Corps has really changed its identity, and I don't know what that means for the future, but for now, it's not something that I really even recognize in a lot of ways.
What do you mean you don't recognize? Oh, you don't
Well,
recognize the Marine Corps?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. A Marine Corps without tanks and snipers,
I didn't even
that's
know
like
that. That's wild, man.
a bird dog without legs. It's like, how does it work?
I mean, dude, honestly, it feels like the leadership is literally trying to destroy our country.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. I, I think that
Like letting
it.
armies through our southern border and doing stuff like that. I don't understand.
Well, never underestimate incompetence, right? Like we want to blame malice a lot of times, but if incompetence will do, it's usually more likely.
That's true, but I don't know. It seems more than that. I don't know.
Well, I hope not. I do know that the Marine Corps is getting ready for a different style of fighting, and uh, that tanks they're logistically really burdensome.
Yeah.
So I was burning about 2,000 gallons of diesel a day. We went through a lot of
Wow.
ammunition. Uh, they're very heavy. An armored up Abrams weighs about 76 tons.
Hmm.
So when you're looking at space on aircraft, on boats, when you're looking at, potentially beach landings and amphibious operations, you might want something that's a little bit lighter, a little bit more agile, something that doesn't take 11 gallons just to start it, you know?
So,
So
okay, so what's briefly, what's your actual role, as an individual on the tank, and like how many guys are in there? And then I guess could you give me just like a snapshot of just an example of the kind of work you guys actually did?
yeah. I can kind of run through a day in the life. One of the places we worked out of was called Shukvani. That's Shukvani. The reason I'm spelling that out is because you can go on Google Earth and you can find it. Um, and you can see the country that we're operating in. So I had four tanks in my platoon. My role is the tank commander of my vehicle and also the tank platoon commander. So I'm in charge of all the tanks. I'm in charge of my tank. Specifically, if my tank is fighting, then I need to be pretty involved in that. But also, my gunner needs to be able to kind of run the tank by himself and be in charge of it while I work on the radios because I'm going to be talking to adjacent forces. I'm going to be talking to aircraft. I'm going to be talking to the company commander, as well as the other tanks in my platoon to kind of maneuver these chess pieces around the
Hmm.
battlefield and make sure that the fighting is going the way it needs to go. But also sometimes all you can do is just fight your tank. So that's sort of what my role is. The platoon commander is in charge of making every decision and my method for making those decisions, because I had less experience than the Marines I was in charge of, was just to ask for their advice and tell them, hey, this is the situation, this is our mission. How do you think we should do it? And they'd scratch their heads and kick the dirt and say, well, sir, I think we should probably do it this way. And I would listen to them and take parts and pieces or the whole idea straight from them, and then turn around and issue that as an order. Like, okay, this is now what we need to do. This is what it needs to look like at this time, and this is how we're going to do it. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to shift to this plan over here. All right, ready, break, here we go. So, uh, one of our big missions there at Shukvani was building a bridge over the Helmand River to connect the Sangin province with a district called Musakela. We wanted to do that so that people could vote. In the first ever election in Afghan history, people were going to
Wow.
get a chance to vote. Taliban was very much not interested in that, but we
Isn't that when they
needed,
had the ink on their fingers or whatever?
yep,
I remember
yep,
that.
yep. So we needed people to be able to make it across the river to vote. So we're building a bridge, and one
Did
of
the
my
people
jobs.
were they excited about that? Were they like stoked, or was it like weird, or they weren't sure, or
I don't think that they really cared.
they didn't care?
The literacy rate was probably 2 to 3% in this area. So everybody was really subject to whatever their religious leaders, the imams, were telling them.
Yeah,
So think about like Catholicism when it was all read in Latin and nobody
yeah,
could understand it. There's a lot of corruption that comes through that.
for sure.
Same thing with the versions of Islam that were in this area. A lot of corruption. So whether people really cared about it from a voting standpoint, democracy is a step far removed from literacy, I would say. So we were kind of starting at the wrong level. We're asking people to step over too many stairs to get to
Gotcha.
where we wanted them to go. I do think that having that infrastructure just for trade routes is valuable to
Hmm.
people. So they might have been excited about that. So in order to protect this bridge, we've got four tanks. The tanks always go out in pairs. Um, so I've got myself, my wingman, and then my platoon sergeant has his wingman. So that's the 3 and 4 tank. I'm the one tank. My wingman is the two tank. We'd send them out in sections, and I created a really random pattern so that nobody could know when we were going to be out, where we were going to set up, how long we were going to stay. Because as soon as there's any kind of predictability, then you can get a sniper who's waiting for you. They can put IEDs in the ground.
Hmm.
You want to take different routes all the time. Uh, just really try to limit how predictable you are. So we would mount the tanks inside the wire, and I would light a cigar, and I had a little cigar clip that went on my 50 cal. My wingman would light his cigar. I'd request permission to exit. I'd leave the base, and we'd go set up and observe an area, and make sure that nobody was coming in to mess with the engineers as they're doing their bridge thing. And then we would, exfil at the end of that. And it might be 16 hours, it might be 4 hours. There's times when it was, north of 70 hours or
Mm.
many days. And uh, one time we hadn't had any contact for, gosh, I think weeks of zero contact. So a really slow period. And you don't want to get out of the tank if you can avoid it, because then you're pretty vulnerable. But I had this cooler full of Snapples in the back of my tank, and I slowly became obsessed with getting Snapples for my guys and for myself. And finally, I was like, I'm going. Like, I'm just gonna go. So as soon as I got up out of the turret, I stood on top and I like stretched my back for the first time in a long time, uh, and as soon as I did that, two shots impacted right at my feet. So there was a sniper who'd been watching us for God knows how long, right? Could have been days, could have been weeks. And as soon as I got out, he took that chance, and he just missed on range. So he
Oh
shot
my
low.
goodness.
Uh, and I didn't get my Snapples, and I was so pissed. But yeah, that's kind of a day in the life, I guess. And
Wow.
then we would at the end of it, we would head back towards the base. I'd call on the radio and request permission to re-enter friendly lines, fire up another cigar, and we'd go in and get the tanks fueled up and ready for the next. And then at another random interval, the other tank section would go out. And that way we could get crew rest, we could get maintenance on the vehicles, the mechanics could go through everything. And we were able to keep up that op tempo for months on end.
Wow. Did you ever see the movie Fury?
I did, yeah.
Did you like that movie?
Yeah, I do like it. It's
That's a
great.
pretty
It's
good movie.
super entertaining. Some kind of poor tactical decisions in there at times, but
Yeah,
uh, but yeah, that was a great movie.
it's a movie. Um, okay, so do you mind telling me about how you got injured?
Yeah, the first time was our very first mission, and I was waiting on a fuel resupply. Me and my guys were all out of the tanks, and we're sitting down, ready to get into some food and get some water. The temperature was about 130 degrees. It was a little over 150 degrees inside the tank,
Oh my
and
gosh.
my loader specifically was having some heat injury problems there, and I was trying to get everybody cooled off and hydrated. Your water is also 130 degrees, so even just drinking water is really hard and a little bit painful because it's hot. Uh, but you've got to be drinking water almost constantly just to survive in it, especially when you're wearing, all of your gear. It's just a tough situation. So everybody's kind of sitting in the corner of this compound that we'd taken over that had walls that were 8 or 10 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet thick. Felt pretty protected in there. There's some sniper shots that were coming over and stuff, but like nothing that was that big of a deal. And mostly we're just waiting for it to cool off, and that's when the fighting usually starts. because nobody wants to fight when it's that hot. But on this day, they did, and they started their assault. I've heard everywhere between 75 and 150 Taliban that attacked our position. I was there with a tank section, so I had my 8 Marines there, and then we were there with those recon dudes. There's probably 20 of them, and yeah, they opened up with a mortar shot, and that mortar hit right in the middle of me and all my guys, and it killed my gunner instantly, and it really badly injured 3 other Marines. Two others were relatively okay, although they've had to deal with some PTSD stuff ever since. I got some shrapnel in my back and in the back of my head, and I had a bad blast injury from that caused a brain damage,
Mm.
traumatic brain injury, and then some PTSD on top of that. Uh, my guys were hurt really bad, and my focus went purely to working on them and to kind of throwing on tourniquets and trying to stop bleeding. One of them took a big piece of shrapnel to his forehead and actually lost the front of his forehead. You could see the frontal lobe of his brain, and
Oh,
he was conscious. He was conscious and talking to me.
oh my goodness.
So I sort of felt like I was already dead and that maybe I was in hell or something like that. Uh, and it was all very confusing. I taped a piece of cardboard over his forehead. Um, and there's some of his brains were in his face and his eyes, and I was like wiping that stuff off, and he's still conscious. It's just an unbelievable thing. He's still alive. Uh,
Wow.
when I first got to talk to him after the deployment, he'd had to go through several amputations, and he had to wear a helmet, and his forehead was still all caved in. He's very intelligent individual, and he'd maintained that, but he'd lost his ability to regulate emotion, which is part of the job of the frontal lobe. And I was like, man, looks rough, but I'm glad you're alive. And he said, I'm not. And from an emotionless standpoint, I can see where he's coming from. He lost his wife, he lost his kids, he wasn't able to be around them anymore. His quality of life was extremely low. It's it's a tough situation, but we've gotten so good at saving people's lives, mostly through the advancements that have come through this warfare uh, that we've saved some people that by all means should be dead. So now we need to figure out like what does life look like for them, and that's a never-ending challenge, right? We saved a Taliban dude that got blown up by his own IED, and he lost all 4 limbs. And it's like, we returned him back to his family. What's his quality of life like in Afghanistan? You know, so there's like some philosophical things that come up with that. But yeah, we ended up repelling that assault. Uh, one of my one of my loaders who became my gunner did some pretty heroic stuff there in a tank by himself and repelled a lot of the enemy. Uh, another guy named Lance Corporal Noyes, while machine gun fire, while mortar fire continued to impact that compound we're in, he was running around on the ground doing ammo resupplies to everybody. Both of those individuals ended up getting awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with a V for valor. That
Mm.
that is an uncommon award for Lance Corporals. Uh, but my Marines were incredible. They're phenomenal men, and they did phenomenal things when the situation required it of them. I ended up in the hospital and the concussion recovery center for several weeks following that, and they they wanted to send me home, and maybe should have, but I also got the option of staying, so I stayed, and I went
Wow.
back to my unit, continued the job. In October of that year, which was 2012, we took a place called Keshmesh Khan with Australian Special Forces. We burned 17 metric tons of heroin in one day, black tar heroin, and one of the Aussie commanders lost his life stepping on an IED on that. About 30% of our guys were medevaced. Around 70% of our vehicles were inoperable at the end of that mission. I think our withdrawal back to base, I can't even remember now, but I want to say that it took like 40 hours just to get back. And we had a lot of attrition from IEDs and from rocket attacks and stuff during that. Um, I got I got hit by a couple different IEDs on that, and I also got shot by an anti-tank rocket called a recoilless rifle. Superb shot from a couple miles away, way outside the normal range for that weapon system. The Taliban, those guys know how to shoot. They're fantastic mortarmen. Not so much on the rifle, but they're really good with their mortars and with their rockets,
Hmm.
and tremendous with IEDs as well. So kudos to those guys for being good at their job. Um, yeah, and same deal. I was in recovery for a while, and then just went back and continued the job until February of 13 and came home. And that's when kind of got to a next echelon of medical care. And they're like, oh man, you're pretty jacked up. And they pulled me out of tanks, put me in Wounded Warrior Battalion, where my job was just to go to like 6 to 8 different doctor appointments per day. And I did that for, like I said, about 18 months, I think. And then they gave up and I came home.
Wow, man. Um, Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your service. That's pretty credible.
It's an interesting thing, right? Like, why would anybody step into a job? Because that's all it is. It's just a goofy job where the consequences could be that severe. And the reality is, it's because the rewards are worth it. Like the American people are are good people. They're wonderful. This is a fantastic country. It's worth fighting for. It's worth dying for. It's worth suffering for the rest of your life just so that it can be possible for somebody else to experience the opportunities that we have here. So, if whenever somebody says something like that, says thank you for your service, it's like, man, thanks for being worth it. Like that's the bigger task by a lot.
Hmm. Man, well, I did want to ask you about that, about motivation, because it seems like from the time you were a young man, you have a tendency to run towards the danger. Um, where do you think that comes from?
Oh, I think it's some foolhardiness. I think it's some arrogance. I think it's some ego. I think uh that I wanted to do heroic things, not understanding what that meant. But also it's where I feel very comfortable. In calm environments, I feel a little bit itchy. In chaotic environments, I feel very comfortable. I feel very calm. I like having that friction. And I'm not necessarily like a thrill-seeking guy, although it may look like that from the outside. That's just not how I feel. But I like it. I think is the bottom line. But I also really like sitting on a, pardon me. I also like sitting on a river and putting my feet in the water and just kind of watching the gravel roll past me too. So it's all like it's all just part of anybody's journey of becoming a person and living a life. But the bottom line for me was that I had grown up in this beautiful area where I'd gotten to explore and live so much. And I thought, well, I've got to do something to earn this. And I was thinking about that when I was fighting fire too. It's like I've got to be able to protect this a little bit. And in fighting fire, I started to lose some of that idealism because some of the fires that I'd put out that I'd really risked my life on, I saw get burned up by subsequent fires later on. And then I started to think about our forest ecology and health as a whole and what a detriment it was that we were suppressing all these fires. So I thought, well, that's not doing it. I'm kind of just risking it for money at this point, which I needed to go to college. But after college, it's like, well, now let's do something like really meaningful. And that's why I wanted to serve in the military. And being a leader in the military was a natural thing for me as well because I just perform at a higher level when I'm in a leadership role.
Hmm.
So that's how I could sort of give the most was by being in that role. But how you feel about things, accomplishments, experiences, all of that gets tempered by time, and our memories shift a little bit, and pretty soon you're not remembering the event, you're just remembering the memory of it, and it all gets distorted. So I think that we tend to feel differently about things as they go on. But like I was mentioning earlier, and having this little fire get away from me that I was burning a couple days ago really brought back like what a challenging job that is for firefighters out there, and asking firefighters to fight fire in wilderness areas without water is nuts.
Yeah.
Um, but God bless them because they keep doing it, and they're just incredible men and women. And I think about that in the military too. I look at the people who are capable of it and are signing up today, and I just applaud them so much because they don't know what they are getting into. They've got an idea and they're willing to risk it all anyways. And I just think that that's more of what makes us such a beautiful country.
Yeah, man. And guys like you too. And there's nothing foolhardy about wanting to be a hero, you know? I think
Yeah,
we
maybe.
need that. I
Yeah.
mean, I think from my perspective, God put that in your heart, and I think all men want to be heroes. Some are just more able to numb that with other things or tell themselves enough times that it's foolhardy and talk themselves out of doing something.
Yeah. Well, I think you've just got to be really careful with like what the definition of heroism is and understand what it looks like. I want to be clear that I wasn't seeking I wasn't seeking trials. I wasn't trying to find situations where there'd be an opportunity to do something big. uh, it was just a really natural and normal thing for me to to go into these environments where things like that were required. And I think that uh, the phrase "cometh the time, cometh the man" is real, and I see people rise to the occasion all the time. I see people fall back to their level of training, and I see people rise to the occasion. And uh, you cannot predict what kind of person will be the one who rises to the occasion. And it will be different on a Tuesday versus a Thursday for that same individual. But when it happens, and it always does in any emergency, it's pretty cool. And I think it's something that uh, makes us really special as a species as well. And I see it all the time. I see people do incredible things all the time, and I think every time I think, wow, like I get to be the same species as whatever just did that. Like, how badass is that?
That's cool. Yeah, how do you think like the experience of war changed you?
It's a good question. It's a hard thing to know from my own perspective. It's something that I asked other people that were close to me, like, "Hey, do you feel like I'm different?" Because I feel different, but also it's so gradual that it's hard to know, right? Uh, if you look back at a picture of you at a specific time, then you can skip some of those steps and feel like, oh, yeah, I remember who that guy was a little bit, and I'm way different from him. My idealism is pretty much extinguished at this point. Uh, I I believe much more in physics and consequence and in reaction now than I did before. I believe in determinism, which is just a physical expression of fate, I guess,
Do
which
you
other
believe in
people
God?
I go back and forth. I think that, if there is a God, he's kind of an asshole sometimes. And I don't know if that's the kind of guy that I want to associate with. And then other times I think that it's just too big and chaotic to have an intelligent design like that. And then other times I think it's too big and chaotic to not have an intelligent design. So the bottom line is I have no idea. Um, I've I've seen I've seen evidence in my life that that I can't explain away with physics. And I've also seen stuff that I think, gosh, how could there be a God and have this occur as well?
Yeah, it's a deep question. The
It is.
Bible says that actually, the Bible calls the devil the god of this world.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
Yeah. And you can look at warrior societies all over the world, and they'll all have a little bit different take on their own religions than the civilians of that same society. Uh, and I think the Vikings are a fantastic example of that. If you look at Norse mythology as it pertained to the pastoral people who were farming in Scandinavia, they they saw their gods very differently than the Vikings who were going out and fighting. You can see the same thing in Greek mythology, and with the Peloponnesian Wars. Like the farmers looked at things very differently than the artists, than did the Spartans, for example.
Hmm.
So it it's all a matter of perspective and life experience and just what you need to feel to feel strong or feel safe, or feel loved. But yeah, there is an evil component of the world for sure, and it is expressed through the things that men can do to each other.
For sure, man. I think you know a lot of people have that problem of, well, why is all this bad stuff happening if there's a God? And I just think that we have free will as humans, and I think the American church has done a bad job of putting in people's heads that every single thing that happens on earth is caused by God or is God's will. And I believe that God is a little bit more hands off, and that a lot of bad stuff happens, and it's not His will. He doesn't want that stuff to happen. That's just evil.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I don't personally believe in free will, but there are some compelling arguments that say that it exists, but the arguments that say that it doesn't are more compelling to me.
Yeah, I feel like just like about anything else in the world, it's probably not a matter of free will or not. It's a spectrum. You know,
Sure,
I feel like
possibly, yeah.
everything is a spectrum. Like I think as humans, we like so much want to make things this or that when almost everything is a spectrum.
Yeah, and a spectrum in ways that are really hard to conceptualize, right?
Hmm.
We tend to think things pretty two-dimensionally, and we know that they're actually three-dimensional. And then if we think about it a little bit more, then they're definitely four-dimensional if we add the time component to it. And then if we think about time being relative, then it's like, well, what are we even doing here? Like this
Yeah,
has gotten too big to think about anymore.
yeah. Well, for what it's worth, man, I believe in God, and I believe He loves you and He's proud of you.
Thanks, man. I hope you're right.
um, so okay, that was super deep, and we're coming up on time, man. I love it. Thanks again for sharing that stuff. But tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now,
Yeah.
because you just got back from doing some cool spearfishing stuff, and yeah, tell me what you're doing now, man. Because you told me a little bit, but it was kind of like the 10,000 foot level. I didn't quite follow, to be honest.
Sure. So now I I'm most of what I do is my podcast, right?
Okay.
So I
Which
travel and
is great, by the way. I love the diversity of
thank
topics
you.
and very thoughtful, and yeah, it makes me want to do more different stuff. So, but great work, man.
Thank you very much. So I travel with the podcast quite a bit, and I, collect these crazy experiences and then learn from people who are experts at it. Uh, the podcast guests are wildly diverse, so we cover everything from history to cooking to spearfishing and hunting and agriculture and politics. It's a different show every week. So in the last 4 weeks, for example, I went to the Hunt Expo, where we got to talk very briefly. I'm sorry that we
Yeah.
didn't get to talk
No, that's
longer.
all good, man.
Um, I went straight from there to the Florida Keys and went fishing with some buddies for about a week. Had some cool experiences in the Everglades and on the Atlantic side offshore. I went straight from there to Venice, Louisiana, and did some tuna fishing and some inshore fishing for redfish and for black drum. Caught
Nice.
five monster yellowfin tuna. One of them was 196
Oh my
pounds. Caught it on a
gosh.
spinning reel, sight fishing off the surface. It was
That's dope.
incredible.
I saw some photos on your social. That was cool.
Dude, incredible, incredible experience. Uh, Went straight from there to the Big Island of Hawaii, where I met up with Kylie Umeda, national champion spearfisherman, and Kylie and I dove for a couple days and caught a bunch of octopus and shot a bunch of other fish and just kind of learned about the reef and learned some diving techniques from her. She owns Aim Right spear guns, which are the spear guns I use. They're tremendous. And yeah, then I went over to Maui. I got to do a little bit of axis deer hunting and check that scene
Nice.
out. Uh, a note on the axis, a lot of brands are sending ambassadors out to get video content of axis deer hunting on Lanai and Maui, and they really treat it as like hunting in paradise, which it is. What it is also is a growing ecological bomb. And when I was diving in Maui, everything within 150 to 200 yards of shore, the reef is dead. The coral is dead. It's just gray. And it's got all this topsoil sitting on top of it. These axis deer, there's around 60,000 of them on Maui. It's not a big island. And they spend a lot of their days in these little draws where they've eaten all the vegetation. They've stripped the bark off of most of the trees, and whenever they get rain events, they get massive floods that come down those draws,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no vegetation to hold on to it. So the erosion problem, especially on Molokai, which is our largest reef in the United States, um, it's killing those reefs. And if that happens, those islands die too, right? It's very much connected. So if the reef dies, those islands are going to turn into deserts. It is a massive problem. So yes, Axis, one of my favorite animals in the world, so good to eat, so fun to hunt, really beautiful. And hunting them in Hawaii is awesome, but it is a massive problem and it is definitely more complex than hunting in paradise. And
Hmm.
yeah, now I'm back home. Next week I'll be helping out with a veteran steelhead event in Idaho with some good friends over there. And then I'll be rolling into spring bear season and doing some Hell's Canyon spring bear hunts out of my jet boat. I'm gonna be uh oh, hold on just a second. All right, we're back. I'm going to be doing a bunch of spearfishing for a national online freshwater spearfishing tournament this summer. I'm
Hmm.
going to try and win, and then I'll roll into guiding archery season this fall. I'll go to Australia and hunt down there for water buffalo and pig for about 3 weeks. Come back and teach a hunting school, do some rifle elk stuff, and then roll into waterfowl, and then it'll be show season again, and we'll start the whole thing over.
Dude, you lead a very cool sounding life.
It always looks sexy. It's a heck of a lot of work.
For sure.
I've got seven different jobs. Tax season is a nightmare for me,
Oh, I bet.
but uh, it's really fun. I like living this way, and I like work. I like working hard on things and staying busy and seeing what I can do to help other people.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. Spearfishing is another topic. Last time I went was on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like pretty cold. You're diving down. When we were there, I mean, visibility was probably 3 feet, and you're diving
yep.
down in like the dark, and then you see a giant rock 3 feet in front of you, and you can hear the sheep's head like, and but I don't like dark water that much, and I knew I wasn't gonna like it, but I did it because it scared me. I did it like intentionally because it scared me. Like clear water, I'm fine with, but something about dark water, it was freaky, man. But I'm glad I did it. And I'm hoping to do more of that kind of stuff in the future. But very
You
cool
should.
sport.
I encourage I encourage you to I encourage everybody to check out freshwater spearfishing. And and salt water as well. But fresh water is a little bit more accessible to most of us.
Hmm.
And there's probably a species that you can hunt that's near where you live. And one of the biggest reasons to do it is absolutely hunting. It's not fishing.
Yeah.
And you will find that 60 seconds or 30 seconds that you can spend under the water hunting fish will translate in ways to hunting on land uh, that just make you so much more effective, make you so lethal. And
Interesting.
I really believe that the future of hunting in America is amphibious.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Well, so much more we could talk about, man. We'll have to maybe link up for another one sometime. But I really enjoyed getting to chat with you for a bit, man.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your time, and hopefully you can link up again sometime in person.
I hope so.
All right, man. Thanks again.